G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff, Ukraine War Update for the 21st of April 2026. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate, author of the books The Boy Who Decayed, Power Games, Into the Earthbound, and Erotic Tales from the Empire. As the war continues, I continue to bring you news from both sides. Now in today's episode, we are going to start with the Ukraine map and go and look at today's main events. Then, after a brief sponsorship message, we'll look at Russia's deadly missile barrage on Kiev. This was one of their biggest single-day attacks. Single-target attacks, I should say. Now, we do have actual rare, but we do actually have official Ukrainian videos of the explosions, allegedly. Now, we also have news following on from Fedor's call to challenge Zelensky. And we're taking a look at the situation in Russia from a different news service. Now, what's happened today is not unusual. For those who want to check Russian news, I bet it's happened to you too. Is the Russian internet down or blocked? It is actually geo-locked. It is not blocked. Sorry, the Russian internet is not down. In fact, it's highly functional. However, it is prioritized to the Russian military right now. The Russian internet is not down. It is not a technical outage. It is heavily blocked, throttled, and deliberately disrupted by the government. Rather than being completely down, many sites are geo-blocked by Russia, including TASS, Sputnik. Now, if you're in America, I think you can still get TASS, and I haven't tried all the VPNs, but it detects most VPNs straight away and blocks them. They detect Australia and most Australian users. Now, this is interesting. Most Australian users are blocked. However, official government sources seem to be able to access Russia freely. So, if I was, say, in the state, I'm in the state capital, but say if I was a state government official on an official account, I would probably be able to, and the same if I was in the media, I would be able to read you the Russian news right now. There are crackdowns on VPN, and there are crackdowns on countries, and there are crackdowns on WhatsApp, Telegram, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Now, some of them are restricted. Their speed is throttle. Now, there are some most are actually. There are levels of bans. Again, officials and certain institutions can still access these sites. But like I said, me being general public in the eyes of Russia, I can't access Russian news today. According to the Centre of European Policy, Russia implemented a throttling starting 24th of July. This is where I'm getting the news from. And what they're building is called the sovereign internet. Authorities are testing a whitelist system that actually restricts the functionality of the internet. So, say someone tries to access Russian news and they're a nobody. For now, you'll probably get blacklisted. But eventually, state-approved services and sites will be available. But for now, some approved domestic services will be completely shut off from the wider global web. And some Russian social media will be some parts will be only available in bricks. Now, the government's claim is this is just routine maintenance. There's just that Ukraine is disrupting mobile internet, which is true, by the way. According to many sites, Ukraine has attempted to, and in some parts successfully jammed Russians' mobile services. This is because on the Russian front line, Russia has been using mobile tracking as well to try and track Ukraine's movements. So, because a lot of communications go these days through mobile phone networks. Now, independent sources such as Human Rights Group, digital experts, believe this is just straight out digital suppression that goes against the wider, shall we say, spirit of Glasnost. However, it is being called Shobanet, and Shobanet basically is the Russian population for, our internet. Basically, they know better than anybody. I mean, it's not the first time for anybody my age knows communism. So they're not happy, but they're also not unhappy. They are waiting the outcome of these tests. And yeah, but the Russian grip on the internet has disrupted all but a few Russian information services. So there is still some Russian news. So we're going to see a glimpse of Russian thinking today and see where they're headed. Now, I'll get to the other. After I look at the map, we will go and I'll give you a brief analysis of what's happening on the front line and the shift in frontline dynamics. And then at the end, we'll discuss Vladimir Putin's strategic shift and current intentions from observation of shifting and growing domestic and global pressures. Now, there is no names going to be mentioned. I doubt that anybody in Russia is going to go on record and say, "Hi, I'm the official opposition and I oppose this war." We all know it's going to happen to them. Yeah. Faster than you could say learning to fly, they are learning to fly. Now, some of the window throws, I think Ukraine News does this often. Ukraine News will tell you they are throwing traitors out of the window. That is true. But I'm telling you right now, a lot of those window throws are not official. People have realized that the best way to get ahead is to get the Russian mafia to throw someone out the window and then claim they were a traitor. At least half the murders are not state-sponsored or official FSB. Some have been suicides, but some have been third-party murders disguised to look like they were traitors to cover up the truth. Particularly when it comes to the nefarious activities of North Korea. Now, I'm sure you all heard about North Korea and some of the activities and the war of words going on with Trump. That South Korea doesn't get to decide the fate of South Korea. But then again, South Korea shouldn't decide the fate of North Korea if you want peace. I mean, remember, they were only unified by the Japanese War in the first place. They were never a unified nation for long. And historically, North and South have fought. And historically, they did split into three nations. And historically, the Koreans, when they were once upon a time, way back a unified nation, used to actually rule parts of the continent that is now parts of China. And there are estimated 30 million Koreans still in those areas, but they're heavily outnumbered now by Chinese. Although with the decline in China's population in rural areas, that doesn't mean the Chinese overall population decline, which is estimated to be 2%. But rural population decline is around 50%. So, yeah. That means half the population of rural areas have moved, not died, moved. A lot of people are misunderstanding the stats right now. They've only had a 2% decline in total population since the last official census. And the current census is what's called a SALT census. This is where they measure domestic consumption of salt and estimate it by daily intake per person. And they do exclude any industrial uses, which are highly easy to protect. So right now they're applying salt measurements to actually see what the real world population is, because India and other countries for so long have overpopulated and have now gone through severe declines and still trying to claim large numbers for world aid as well as development funds, etc. No, I think this favoritism towards India is nuclear blackmail, but it'll come to an end. India's flexing will be challenged by China. China's flexing will be challenged by India. Russia is the pawn right now and the goal at the same time. A lot of people don't believe me. That's fine. A lot of people claim I'm pro-Russian. Well, do you want to see India and China cause a world war fighting over Russia? And because if they take over Russia, Europe is next. Although Europeans don't care because I'm not going to be around. I'm only here for a good time. White women, man, they're the worst. They're the reason for the global decline of the white population. It's not a natural population decline. Now, Russia was highly motivated by basically the population challenges they face today, as well as the economic challenges, in that I'm not saying this is entirely all on Putin, but internally and externally, Ukraine is included in this. All of the eastern continent has had disastrous economies until they've surrendered to Europe. And it's amazing how Poland became the first modern Polish state. I think the previous time they were a successful country in the Commonwealth of old, but that's like 17th century. But in the modern era, like 19th century Poland was in terrible decay, as with most of Eastern Europe. But 20th century Poland was not highly successful. Well, they were successful, but now they are highly successful. They do not need to send their people overseas to earn money. They actually want Polish to come back to Poland. Now, Poland had been in decline for 70 years. And I knew some Poles, and they would tell you how basically the state would spend money to repair a building, and all they would do is pay lots of locals to wash the walls. There were no repairs. Nothing was repaired. The idea of actually repairing anything or planning new buildings, they just didn't have it. The brickworks would say we produce 1,000 bricks. What could you do with brickwork? They could barely produce 1,000 bricks. The kiln was down more often than not. And you have no idea how long it takes to warm up these kilns. How much gas they were consuming without producing bricks. It's why brickworks and steelworks are highly concentrated, highly regulated industries. Well, in Eastern Europe, they were so desperate they built many of these bricks and gas. They built a lot of the old. They built a lot of old wood fire brickworks. A lot of old wood fire and coal burning steelworks. They didn't build anything modern, and when they did, the the required craftsmanship wasn't there. And everybody knew it from the start. And this attitude still, while Poland has been able to lift out of it, this attitude remains in Ukraine and Russia today. And until they get out of the 20th century model of thinking, they won't be able to, shall we say, move past the past. So in order to get this war, I'm not saying that modernization is the sole answer, but I'm saying one of the motives for continuing this war is Ukraine's desire for modernization, an end to the old coal burning days, so to speak. They want modern gasworks. They want modern arc plasma furnaces. They want all the modern things that they have seen other countries. And seeing Poland rise, yeah, it is possible for Ukraine to do the same. But not if they continue this war the way it goes. Both sides know this. That's why actually began 42 days ago, but there has been a strategic shift. And remember, I said, how many times have I said, if Ukraine can fight Russia to a standstill and then hold them for 6 to 12 months, it is likely the war is over. I said likely because I have no idea whether or not Putin would instigate something like the Orsk contingency or another form of mass devastation in the force Ukraine into surrender. But it may appear, starting today, we have visible signs of Ukrainian success. I know people, and they're going to tell me, Dave, Ukraine's always been successful. No, they've gone from less than 5% of their land occupied to 19.34% officially occupied, with 1% in the grey area. Now, if Ukraine wins the war in the grey area, I don't know if they would have the manpower to maintain such an offensive without triggering a wider war, or again, the problem is both sides want a maximalist outcome. And what happens after the war? Because if Russia stays in the 20th century model, they will continue on a dark path. And I think a lot of people understand this, the 20th century model leads to communism everywhere it touches. It is a tendril of narcissism, entitlement, and absolutism. Now, if Ukraine cannot get out of the 20th century model, they go down the same dark path anyway, whether the war ends with Russia or not. Biden, Obama, Trump, Bush will not matter. All their different approaches, all their different methodologies will not save Ukraine if they continue on the 20th century path of immediate fix thinking, covering over, hiring people to, basically get out the whitewash and basically paint over the cracks in buildings rather than fixing them. There comes a point where, and Czechoslovakia is one of the most successful countries at maintaining its facade. And because they did, they became a famous tourist and filming location. There is no shame in maintaining the facade, but you can't do that on a grand industrial scale. You could do that in small countries with picturesque scenery and become a tourist destination. You can't do that in a country so large that you literally, takes more than a day to travel across. No, the lifestyle differences, once you get out of the city, if you keep the majority of the country in that 20th century model, you will never get past the 20th century. It was only, and this is not saying any past American president is right or wrong, but as a whole, at least they were progressing towards something, not spinning their wheels. And that's the difference between Poland's government of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s as compared to 2010s on. 2010s on, you see real progress. Whether they were left or right, it didn't matter. There was still progress, and sometimes progress in spite. Now, the Baltic states may actually have recognized this and realized that if they stay stuck in the 20th century, they'll never get out of it. So, one of the ways Ukraine can become Ukraine again, because right now they are Ukraine at war, and when Ukraine at war, national identity is hyper-vigilance, hyper-focused, and very easy to anger. And the problem with that is post-war, that turns into murder, high crime rates, and low productivity. That's why I've always said Ukraine doesn't need a European army, it needs a European police force. So why do people keep claiming I'm pro-Russian? Because they don't watch my videos. They don't like bad news. They just want their balls tickled. You know the kind of people they are. They're never happy. They're never satisfied. They just want to be told they're good little boys and girls and that they are always right. Now, we just had a power outage symbol come up on Sumni. This is probably the result of shelling, and drone strikes have probably begun again. Actually, I doubt they stopped, and I doubt they're going to stop again. I think Russia's going to pace it all day, every day now, and you'll only get the daily tallies. But here we have openings on the front again, lots of artillery, lots of new areas opening up with artillery, but the push out is measured in meters. Yeah. So it's a slow advance. That is, yeah. But there are other areas that are just totally quiet, where Russia's just moved in, sat down, and nothing's happened. The fighting here has lulled. As you can see, there's still fighting in this section. Kupiansk, there's been fighting without Russia. The Russians making small gains in the southern end of Kupiansk. But for the rest of the map, there is lots of fighting. The street fighting in Lyman is measured in single blocks. The Russians have only made tiny progress here in the last months. They've made nothing in the last week. Here seems to have the Ukrainians are still able to push up to their so they've not been able. Russia has not been able to secure any of this forestry area, and are now probably looking to go around to cut off Lyman and shift the strategic position here. After initial gains, it's down to street fighting. After initial gains, they're bogged here and here and here. After fierce battle to capture this crossing, they're now digging in. And this is common, and digging in often sees artillery and exchanges along the front. When front line becomes second line, it's still within artillery range of the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians seem to often attack the second line to try and force the Russians back to defend it. Now, there are infiltrations and artillery exchanges, but all in all, Ukraine is still able to infiltrate Krasnokovia, and the Russians have failed to secure it completely, though, and operations there will continue for weeks, and they're now talking about months. And the same here, the Russians have dug in places, made a few small advances, but mostly they have not moved the needle. And here again, after small gains and recapturing some territory, they lost. Yeah, they've made no net gains. It's only recapturing territory they've lost in the last week. Here as well, Zaporozhye is slowly becoming a standstill. Now, as we look at the strategic situation, Russia has launched air-launched missiles close to and probably flown over the Bulgaria. Yeah, close to Bulgaria. Russian drones in the region. Spanish jets were scrambled from one of the bases in Romania. The Ukrainians have attacked a what is it? Fedoska in Crimea. The Russians have attacked, allegedly a border crossing. Yeah. Different drone strikes across Ukraine, 135 recorded. But there has been a general shift in strategic thinking. Russia controls roughly 19.34%, according to official maps. But unofficially, it's more like 20 to 20.5. This is what's called the grey area. This is the distance between the front line and Ukrainian positions, as well as areas in the north, where, particularly in Sumy, where Russians' infiltration is high and movement of Ukraine is low, and Ukrainians officials they only move at night and stay close to to Sumy, and the Ukrainian army is roughly between 40 to 50,000, mostly dug in. And so, patrols at night often clash with Russians. But as soon as small firefights break out, they're small, they're mostly quickly disengaged, with both sides eager to return to their trenches. And that is because when a firefight breaks out, there's a drone strike. And you don't want to be around for the drones. Yeah. Now, recent territorial control, having lost a few small areas, I would say small, Russia has captured key logistic hubs in the last 6 months, such as Pavosk. Now, the Institute of War is believing that Ukraine has blunted the spring-summer offensive And this might see a late winter offensive to try and make up for lost ground. May, because, and again, what we see, small, slow advances. Russia is grinding. Progress is measured in fractions. Otherwise, instead of kilometers per day, it's uh, the next trench, which is sometimes meters away. Well, up to 300 meters, but it's still like it's a third or a quarter or a half. That is it. Mostly it's more like a third or a quarter. And some of these have been undone and redone and recaptured, which has expanded the grey zone as contested areas across the front line, which are between 100 to 500 meters wide. Plus, beyond that, there's the area of infiltration, which can be also up to a kilometre. What makes the grey zone and the yellow zone, the danger area, which is which has Ukrainian troops in it, is the air war. We have seen with the ground forces slowly grinding to a halt, the conflict is now shifting to long-range drones, missile strikes, targeting of infrastructure and logistics far beyond the front line by both Ukraine and Russia. And in this air war, of course, is a growing focus on interceptors to reduce the effectiveness of the other side. This is where Britain has stepped in with 150,000, and others want to bring interceptor production up to 150,000. But right now it's only in the thousands. And no one knows whether or not they can achieve such an ambitious target, or how effective the drone war will be if Russia puts more energy and more, although energy is a long-term project, but more into direct energy weapons and destruction, long-range destructions, such as highly focused microwave bursts that disrupt communications in broad areas for quite some distance, often able to swat drones easier, faster, and cheaper than laser weapons or what's the other? I'm not thinking of guns. More traditional electronic warfare systems. I'm trying to think. I suppose wide area jamming, but focused or directed beam weapons are more likely to be the counter to Ukrainians going forward. Probably run by diesel generators, which are merely to run the cooling systems for the much larger portable power structures that they are hooked into. Probably multiple power lines, which is why, of course, Ukraine is targeting things like the Kursk power station. Now, briefly, I would like to appeal to you to support the channel by following and supporting my Kickstarter, the Empire of Elves official, not suitable for work art book will launch soon, featuring artwork featuring Sora, the Empress of the Empire. Now, as I mentioned before, Russia's deadly missile barrage hit Kiev. A building has been completely burnt out, and one has been destroyed, another partially destroyed. And of course, this one has been completely burnt out. There are attacks that hit 28 locations across Ukraine. And for once we get some video. If it will play. Sometimes these are geo-locked. Sometimes they're only available for a short time. Here we go. You can see the streak. You can see how fast it came down. Yeah. Portable, yeah. Why don't you just use flak? Yeah. Flak guns aren't stopping ballistic missiles. Look at the size of that. The explosion is bigger than the building. Look at it. The building is there. It's gone. It's consumed the entire building. Now the building here, this is the one in front of it. Look again. And I'll pause it. Right, the building behind is gone. This one is burnt out. This one's partially burnt out. This partially burnt out one. This is that one in the front. That's this building here. You look at the size of the flame from the impact. Whatever it hit contained, yeah, obviously it's hit something very important. And it's lit the fire. That is a huge, yeah, that's a huge, what do I say, thermal barrack, yeah, devastation. Ukraine currently says the death toll stands at 17. Now, the ex-defense chief has called for wartime elections. Fedorov repeated his call for elections today, backed by mass protests across Ukraine. Now he is highly popular. His popularity index is setting at 32. This is well above Zelensky. And experts say a vote is impossible. Impossible, they tell you. No. There are large parts of Ukraine that aren't under attack, where you can hold elections outside of the cities. You can hold elections. Europe just won't. That's a fact. He's shocked the political establishment by calling for elections again. He's a technocrat, basically bureaucrat from the technology side, but he's not in charge of war. He's in charge of logistics, technological innovations, anti-corruption measures. He was fired as defense minister for failing to stop the spread of corruption. But he's out of the box thinking since January is why Ukraine is able to bring Russia to a grinding halt. Well, to almost a grinding halt. Still better than the last couple of years. In fact, Ukraine's doing better than it's ever done. They may be in a position of strength to end this war had they kept Fedorov on or falling out with Oskander, and Oskander himself got fired for engaging in political activities against his... Though he says he's loyal to Zelensky, he's refused to accept other jobs and turned down Palantir, a US-based but rather controversial company, in how it gained its Ukrainian contracts. But still, democracy can't be Russia's hostage. They can. Most of Ukraine. Look at the map. Look at the map. You're telling me that they can't get the civilian turnout anywhere else. All the other cities, all they have to do is say, right, if you're in these areas, you go to these areas. If you're in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9, 10 areas, you go to the outskirts of your oblast, the Ukrainian, let's say, call it the Ukrainian side, right? So the people in this middle area from Kiev down to Donetsk will go to other polling stations outside of the area. All they have to do is bus people around. Yeah, spend a few million to show that you still support democracy. But they won't do it because they don't want to lose their boy Zelensky because he's their obedient puppet. They don't want democracy anymore. Europe doesn't want democracy. Democracy gets you opposition parties winning the elections. The opposition party is supposed to be a token voice to give you an outlet for your anger, to not actually be an effective opposition that can win elections. Haven't you caught on yet? Left or right, only the establishment is meant to win elections. Because of Donald Trump, they don't want elections anymore. And they're blaming Donald Trump as the fascist. But Fedorov is a popular figure. He's been able to rally thousands, and those thousands will turn into millions if, and of course, there's always the possibility, and I'm saying, if the Ukrainians don't crack down on them. The Russian official opposition won't speak on public record, but they have found ways to legally get their voices heard. The Moscow Times is not state media and is under the threat of closure. They are walking legal tightropes in Russia. Russia's war against Ukraine has entered a new dangerous phase, with both sides relying on long-range strikes, which Ukraine has reached over 2,000 kilometres from its borders. That risks further escalation as fall and winter approach. Washington has been more aggressive, yet selective in their disclosures and condemnations on what each side can and can't do. US mediation did have some constraints, got some ceasefires, got some breakthroughs for both sides. There were peace talks, but now the parties remain far apart. Moscow insists it controls all of the Donbass. However, that is highly contested, and Kiev is unwilling to surrender it. Even if a ceasefire exists, Ukraine could struggle to accept the terms of defeat. A permanent bar on NATO membership without alternatives or abandonment will have repercussions. We cannot fathom entirely how devastated the Ukrainian populace would be if they can't join Europe or have NATO protection. They have so made it their identity. And it's easy to see why when you look at the success of Poland. But they think it's because Poland joined NATO, not because Poland actually, it's the other way around. Poland has abandoned the constraints of Europe and is succeeding on its own. It is, now again, we're looking at the US bogged down, and the Russian-Ukrainian negotiations are opaque. Observers only know that they meet, exchange the occasional text, the occasional prisoner exchange, occasional body exchange. Ukraine never meets up to its obligations. Russia drags its heels. Every day Zelensky demands more missiles. Russia is upset because Japan wants Russia to back off from the Kuril Islands. These are islands Russia seized in World War II, I believe, though it's not the first time these islands were contested. The Russian economy has slowed. The establishment is worried. Now, Ukrainians also deserve a clear view of what the off-ramp to the war looks like. What are the proposals? Why have they been rejected? The secrecy is now creating a level of paranoia that we haven't seen since the Cold War. And you can have to read between the lines, but without the transcripts of every bargaining position, why the US can't get the Ukraine to budge, what has Putin rejected, the public, and I think he's saying by public, I think he actually means both Russian and Ukrainian public, are highly frustrated. Now, when it reaches a high level of frustration, you have a collapse like the Weimar Republic. They were unable to sustain. They were winning in World War I, but they lost the domestic front, and then they were no longer winning. Soviet dissidents. Now, a lot of dissidents have returned to Russia, but they've forgotten what it's like to be opposition, and a lot of them were opposition who are now in power, and they've forgotten the challenges they faced. And what they used public pressure campaigns, called for transparency, called for reforms. But now that they're in power, they want to enact the same rigid party tactics where we can't negotiate in good faith unless we have absolute secrecy. But as we look back on the Cold War, a lot of things that were kept secret shouldn't have been. Roosevelt's private secretary, many US ambassadors were all Soviet agents. The biggest leaks came from not the CIA, but the FBI. The FBI, by all accounts, should have had public hearings into the methodology, practices. There should have been an open and frank discussion of Soviet and communist infiltration through ideological indoctrination in the schools, so that by the time these people came into positions of power, they were recruitable agents for foreign espionage. Still are, by the way, and a lot of them, though long dead, there are still many pro-Russians, Bernie Sanders, in government who are now pro-China and want to tear the US down. And AOC, Kamala Harris, most of the East Coast white liberal women, pretty much every third worlder US has let in the last 10 years. You have been so tolerant of your enemies, you think your system's so invulnerable that you won't defend it. You are so enamored with the Constitution, you think it's infallible. You didn't understand its constraints. You didn't understand the founders' intentions, and you still don't. The founders intended you to take the imperfections they had, the intentions they desired, and turn them into practices that would strengthen the Constitution and outline a series of cases through precedent, not to have lawyers win every case by screaming racism, but the opposite, that screaming racism shouldn't win an election, shouldn't win someone a visa, should not break your determined will to remain a free peoples without foreign interference. Instead, you allow foreigners into your country and you allow them to take over your companies. And you allow them to dismantle them and send them to their countries because you want num cheaper. And then you wonder why. And white women wonder why there's no rich white men. Because you gave away their jobs. You wonder who's going to take care of you. You spent 20 years rejecting them. Why would they want you now? Well, what if I'm telling you? The Russia's asking the same questions, only in a different way, where they're talking about secrecy, where they're talking about state obligations. Russia is fighting communism. America's fighting communism. Europe is becoming communist. South America is teetering between communism, fascism, and republicanism. Let's call it what it is, republicanism, okay? Most South American states do want to be some form of republic. Argentina, to some extent Brazil, but there's so many who still want communism. They haven't learnt a damn thing from the failures of Venezuela. That wasn't real communism. So, I only bring this up because with so many disasters around the world, there isn't enough people to sit down with Ukraine and work this out. And Russia is saying, we don't have enough people on our side sitting down to work this out. And that 2 American negotiators isn't enough. The Moscow Times is appealing to the broader intellectual community not to save them for the sake of ideology, but for the sake of humanity. And if you can't read into that and go, well, you know what? If we save Russia, we save Ukraine. If we save Ukraine and put a 20-year moratorium on them joining NATO, that gives us time and a way to end the war. And then we'll look at the exact territory, and we have to acknowledge Ukraine should not be forced to surrender territory in the name of peace. As I think Zelensky pointed out, that was a failed policy of Israel. That was a failed policy of appeasement by the British. I don't think it would be any different. Appeasing Russia would be any different. No, I think also forcing Russia to give territory is exactly the same problem. We have a situation where mutual distrust is so ingrained right now that the minority are saying, will the intellectual rise up and unfuddle this entanglement? Because anyone who gives up land, right, is appeasement. And appeasement leads to general unrest. There has to be a way to look at, and of course the closest we've gotten to this is the 58th parallel position. That is, the South Korea got to be South Korea, North Korea got to be North Korea, and they were basically backed to the hilt to negotiate ends. But as we've seen, look how long the round and round and round and round as goes situation in South and North Korea to reach the point where they both realise they've got to find a way to both recognise each other's existence rather than try to unify. So, can we skip a lot of steps? Please. Let's be open and transparent. Please. That will skip a lot of steps, a lot of this backwards and forwards, political grandstanding, and end the war. And remember, these guys are not loving Putin, by the way. They're not doing this because they love Putin. They're doing this because they love what's going to happen after the war is over. And I'm sure Ukraine will love what happens after the war is over if they get the European police force they need to clean up the situations, to clean up the child sex trafficking, the drug trafficking, the widespread rampant theft of public state assets by a kleptomaniac. Oh no, they're never going to go against the WF, are they? Nothing is ever going to happen. We're going to see the next 20 years of failed policies continuing because Europeans, we have to wait for the boomers to die, half of Gen X to die, the millennials to lose power to before we actually see the rot actually finally cut out and people actually start enacting real laws and real institutions that will lock people up for economic sabotage, like the bluehead land whales that deliberately destroyed Cracker Barrel or deliberately destroyed Warner Brothers or how many companies have been deliberately destroyed? Oracle, from within by these bluehead monsters. And they're not bluehead monsters in Russia. They're not greenhead in Ukraine. They appear. That's the sad part. The internal sabotage across the world. It's not just America. Americans got to realize it's not just happening to them. And it's not unique to them. But they have. The war is an opportunity to clean up so much. It is amazing that so few people make it this far, though, into the video. And there's nothing. You can lead a horse to water, you just can't make them think. And the jackass will only always be a jackass. It will never be a racehorse. So there's no pity or for the fool in this household. Why we can't end the war today or within the next 6 months. Vladimir Putin does not want a peaceful end to Ukraine war. He's made it quite clear he wants a victory for Russia. Not a stalemate, not a closing of the books, not a mutual recognition, a victory. Vladimir Putin has publicly stated that the Ukraine war is moving towards its conclusion. This has many commentators and commentators across the world believing US mediated talks are coming to some sort of temporary ceasefire. No, many report that Russia maintains and is building more factories and decentralizing its logistics and reforming its military services and retraining its army through the winter for a new offensive. But now, what's the current strategic consensus? Russian president and Ukrainian president both have zero desire to negotiate. Publicly, both have expressed the desire to negotiate. Zelensky says, anytime Putin comes to my office, we'll negotiate an end to the war. It'll be over in 24 hours. Putin says the same. They're not serious. They have no power to no direct negotiations to affect the outcome of the war. Both sides have rabid dogs who would pretty much tear them apart if they did such an action. Exploiting the winter. Both sides are looking to exploit the upcoming winter. Russia is banking on its belief that the Ukrainian populace will be frozen out, that they cannot survive the energy blackouts that they are inflicting, and will be unable to rebuild and Europe would be unable to supply enough heating elements through the winter. Ukraine is hoping that through the winter that they will be able to destroy enough Russian infrastructure to continue to bring them to a halt. We'll see. Now, long-term military planning. Ukrainian military is long-term planning. As recently as yesterday, UK announced 150,000 drones over the next year. That is not planning for an end to the war. That's an escalation. Poland increasing arms production. China and India are both increasing ammunition production. Brazil is increasing its military production. South Africa, all the way through half the African coast, is increasing weapons production. China, had 36 nuclear weapons officially. Now it's confirmed they have 122, with a possibly variation on that to 142 if some of the multi-stage weapons were redistribution as high-speed missiles with single warheads. Some of their larger strategic rockets are aging out and probably going to be broken down into single missiles. Right. So long-term planning. Ukraine is strategically preparing for the war to last until 2028. Immediate territorial goals. Russian General Staff want to secure the Donetsk and Lugansk regions by the end of the year, so Putin could declare a public victory and negotiations, perhaps then, or a position at least, where they can tell the US that they no longer want to continue this war. Yeah. Again, this is where I think the dog is being wagged. Putin has a bit of sway, but he's not an absolute leader like Yeltsin. And Yeltsin really wasn't an absolute leader compared to Gorbachev. And really, you want someone who could have ended a war in a day, you'd be looking at Brezhnev. That's how far back we have to go. And on the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainians have weak president after weak president, and many say we still have, nothing has changed. That they have that the oligarchs will rule Ukraine, and this is pushing Ukraine away from reform into the hands of hardliners who want to confiscate state assets, to nationalize industries. So you have absolutists on both sides, right? And this is why the war is shifting. Domestic and global pressures are not shifting towards an end to the Ukraine war, but sustained drone campaigns to try and bring about a victory. It's claimed that Russia's oil refining capacity has been reduced by 30%. There's no world oil shortage. So this is greatly exaggerated according to many oil commentators who look at the daily output and say, it's not even half that. Maybe. Briefly. They've attacked 30%, absolutely. Have they crippled it permanently? No. They've only faltered production. And it's mostly excess production that would be going to what's called teapot operations in China. Faltering battlefield gains? Absolutely. Every year, Russia's gains have slowed. Escalation. Up until recently, casualties were rising. They're now falling with occasional spikes, but most of the time there is no immediate sign of either. Ukraine is unable to increase the size of its army, and Russia's unable to economically, unless they declare certain emergencies and take control of their banks, which the Russian government is unreluctant to do, because the world would immediately devalue its currency to zero-ish. Inflation would be enormous. It would be like Zimbabwe or Hungary of the 90s or 1930s, Germany, where deliberate economic destruction they believed deliberate economic destruction. This is where Trump is walking a thin line, because it can bring about action and change, but it can also bring about destruction, which cripples and creates backlash. Now, Russia is trying to shift its leverage. It's trying to grey zone this war, hybrid warfare, to basically disrupt Western allies. Such as right now, Russia's crippled its internet on purpose and satellite relay networks to stop British-made drones flying deep into Russian territory. They're engaged in hybrid warfare against the UK right now, looking to inflict a massive economic cost on UK for their what Russia perceives as British meddling or imperialism. Now, the problem is, and you all know the problem, is that Britain's not the only one. There are third parties interfering with this, and Putin can't turn around and say his allies are his worst enemy in this. Particularly, he can't turn around and call out India for supplying ammunition to Ukraine, because that, again, was done through third parties, and India has no say over that, nor is there any real confirmation that this has taken place. All we have is the words of a few Swedish bloggers and investigators who have been told by the Swedish government to be silent. Now, the story would have been dismissed if the government didn't silence them, did they? Had they just let the story play out, it would remain as, I have no official confirmation. But when officials blackmail bloggers into silence and the threat of prison, we do now know that is most likely true, that the Indian government and arranged with third parties to deliver ammunition to Ukraine to keep the war going. Why would India do that? Because India is trying to be number two, while China is trying to maintain its position as number two and trying to be number one. India is trying right now to take over US tech companies, which includes Oracle and many others. They have their sights aimed on NVIDIA. So do the South Koreans, and so do the Chinese. NVIDIA, AI chips. Soon you'll be able to buy them, I think, but unless you've got $10,000, don't even think about it. These are basically designed to run large language models 10 times faster than the fastest GPU. If they pull this off, NVIDIA's $2 trillion value would soar. If they don't, they collapse. China and India are banking on a collapse, or such a demand for such chips to scale up production to bring down cost that the technologies will be brought to their countries and they get to slowly absorb and build massive giant factories and undermine America's position in the world through domestic GDP production. And then they leverage their enormous revenues, particularly on the black market for NVIDIA chips, to basically buy NVIDIA out. And this has been done before. We've seen hostile takeovers before. We saw how, I forget, but Levino took itself out of IBM as a failing division and turned into one of the most successful companies in the world So it's not unprecedented. Dell engineers came out of Dell engineers. A lot of them came out of the same other tech companies who failed to listen to them on PC design, on the shifting PC marketplace towards gaming, in that companies will no longer be looking to buy a new desktop every year. That Intel development will no longer be annual developments. It will be small scale ups, but would not be worth entirely buying new machines just to type office letters. In fact, I think Dell did warn a shift to office racking, where servers and mid-range data workstations, for large data models, highly specialized graphics work and stuff like that, would be a mid-range market. There's not going to be a large-scale market for people. Now, gaming did try to make 16 gig VRAM a thing. The problem is 16 VRAM went from being $100 to $200 to $500 to $900. No one's going to... Now, Apple's hybrid model and others. But where all this matters, again, Ukraine wants to be in that position. And if the US can shift some of this manufacturing towards Ukraine, but they don't want to because they can't guarantee the future of Ukraine. So Poland and other countries have got to step up their game on bringing about an end to the war. But for now, is military pressure enough? Do you think the military pressure is enough? Do you think there's enough economic pressure to bring about the end of this war? I'm saying there's a possibility. What do you think? Where do you think this is headed? And where do you think it is? And do you think, say, bringing VRAM production to Eastern Europe, particularly some of it into Ukraine, will not only bring down world prices, but help save US tech companies from, say, going from Chinese reliance to Indian reliance, and thus by spreading their factories more and spreading their logistics more, it could bring about a position where Russia goes, you know what? We too want to be in on this because we can manufacture chips. And yeah, let's call it a post, let's call for a post-Zelensky-Putin trade deal. Peace contingent on both stepping down, a freeze on the front, a freeze on fighting, a 20-year moratorium on NATO, and let's open the books. There you go. Peace for Ukraine, everyone. Will it happen? Well, let's see. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. I really appreciate each and every one of you. However, I'm going to need your help. A call to action to support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.